This week's episode is sponsored by the Brilliant Futures Institute. How do you feel as a preeminent force if you are drowning in debt? How do you, in turn, ask people for money when people are asking money from you, from the agreements you've made, and you are not paying them? How is that congruent? Welcome to the Preeminence Podcast.
You cannot be a courageous leader if you're not vulnerable.
Your legacy is every life you've touched.
The only thing that changes our life long term is when we raise our standards.
Now is the time to take risk.
The way it's always been done isn't necessarily the way it should be done.
What is your dream? What do you think 2050, 2100 is going to look like?
The most incredible sort of mystery, I think, is now the question of what comes next.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Welcome to the Preeminence Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew J. Peters. Visit preeminence.tv to learn more about how to create a preeminent presence for your business, organization, or personal brand. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or just ask Alexa to play the Preeminence Podcast. Today, I want to have a simple conversation with you, and it's about finances. Now, the question I have for you is, how do you feel as a preeminent force if you are drowning in debt? Now, if you're listening to this and you are completely debt-free, or you only have business debt with a plan to pay it off as an investment, then this may not be a conversation that you need to have. But if you have consumer debt, if you have credit card debt, if you have past due debt, meaning you can't keep up with the interest, you can't keep up with anything more than minimum payments, then this is something that you need to address. So let me ask you this. How do you show up in your marketing and in your media when you know you have people ringing you up many times throughout the week or demanding that you send them payments? How do you, in turn, ask people for money when people are asking money from you, from the agreements you've made, and you are not paying them? How is that congruent? Back in 2010, I was just getting out of debt. I got myself into debt a second time because I had gotten behind the eight ball. And that happens sometimes as we think that we're going to be making money, so we start buying toys, right? We start buying toys, we start buying cars, we go on fancier vacations, we upgrade our house, and what happens is now we're stuck having to push stuff, having to hustle even more just to keep up. There's one prominent marketer out there that he said when he moved from his apartment or his house in Macon, Georgia, out to, I think it was Laguna Beach, California, he had to come up with at least $50,000 a month just to survive. And he said this publicly. And so if what you're doing is creating this need to give you a push, and that's how you work, then maybe that is okay for you. But for most people, 90% of Americans have some kind of debt. They have debt in their house, which may or may not be good for them. They have debt with credit cards. They have debt with lines of credit. They have personal loans. The idea is that you're spending money that is not yours yet, or you're buying things without the plan set in concrete, knowing that you're going to pay them off with the assets that you have that are generating revenue for you. So how can you ask prospects to pay you top dollar and pay on time when you yourself are not paying your creditors on time? This is something that I had to deal with, because I couldn't in one breath say, I'm sorry, I can't pay you, and then ask the people that had agreed to pay me to get them to pay on time. If you know Grant-Cardone, one of the things that I feel sums up what he's all about is more. It's about how can I make more money? When you have debt, he will tell you, don't pay off the debt, make more money. Make more money, make more money. That's his mantras, is you got to increase your income. And I agree with that. Dave Ramsey, on the other hand, will tell you to sell your car, cut back on your spending, and snowball your debt and live on beans and rice. And that is how I got out of debt. I literally cut everything off. Later on in this episode, you're going to hear an interview that I did, and you'll hear how we basically cut everything out of our lives. Entertainment, telephone, television, internet. We had nothing because we wanted to pay off the debt with everything we had. But I didn't have a strategy working for us that I learned after the fact, after I paid off our debt. If you were like I was, you don't have a way to keep up with the minimum payments and you don't want to declare bankruptcy, there is another solution. you can settle your debts. Now, settling your debts is simply renegotiating your debt repayment with your creditors. When you look at the amount you actually spend or borrowed and the amount you now owe with the interest and penalties, you'll be surprised how much more you're paying. If you're consistently using your credit cards and paying minimum, you'll see that over 50% of your payment is actually going to pay interest. It can be 65, 70% of it is going to pay interest if you're paying the minimum. When it's all said and done, calculate how long it'll take you, as well as how much interest you're paying versus how much principal you've paid. It's not 21% or 29% that they're telling you that you're paying is going to be interest. When you're paying your minimums, it's far more than that. 8 years ago, I interviewed a woman by the name of Mandy Akridge about her book, Negotiate and Settle Your Debts. I found her when I was looking to pay off tens of thousands of dollars in past credit card debt. The book is fantastic, and the methods actually work. Another thing I found out is you can have someone help you settle those debts on your behalf. For about $150 a creditor, you can have someone make all the calls to the creditors for you. They can negotiate all the debt, they have the experience, and they know how to speak on your behalf so they can protect you. They're not going to get involved in the drama. They're going to be very factual, saying, my client has this amount they can pay by this date. Will you accept that or not? Once they talk to your creditors, they're going to come up with some type of negotiation. Then they'll get back with you saying, here are the terms. They want, instead of $50,000, they'll take $20,000 by the end of the next 30 days or 60 days or what have you. They don't want to throw good money after bad, so they want to settle the debt. If you haven't been paying it, they want to complete that, get it off their books. So on average, people will end up settling for 28 to 33% of the outstanding amounts. Now, think about that, 28 cents on the dollar you're paying. If you owe $100,000, settle it for $28,000 or $33,000. That's phenomenal. At the very same time we were paying off our cards, I began to understand about how to 10x my business through offering high-level services. So that grant-cardone approach of making more money and cutting back all your expenses, the Dave Ramsey way of paying off your debt. So we did both at the same time, which is super powerful. Matter of fact, I even wrote a book on it called Don't Own, Don't Rent, Live Well. If you want to check that out, it's still available on Amazon, but it shows how we paid off all of our debt. Now, I want to give you a partial replay of the interview I had with Mandy. If you find this interesting, listen to it carefully. Get the tips from Mandy in this episode, and also go find her book on Amazon. I'm going to put the link to her book down in the comments of this episode.
Mandy, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for having me on.
So for people who are not familiar with your book and what debt settlement is, could you give us kind of a summary about your book and what it's all about?
Sure, absolutely. Matthew, about a year ago, actually it was more, it was about 18 months ago, I found myself without an income and with a huge amount of credit card debt. And while I was going through this process of what should I do, I started thinking about debt settlement, and I did a lot of research on the internet and read books and found out whatever I could. And the more I read about it, the more I thought, why don't more people do this? There aren't a lot of clear-cut paths on how to do debt settlement. So I started doing my own debt settlement, and as I was going ahead and making settlements to the credit card companies, I started documenting my results and put those into a book form, which eventually is now as a self-published book on Amazon.
So you could have kept this information to yourself. Why did you decide to write it in the book and publish this for everybody?
I think I did that because of the results I got. I got such great results, and I was implementing my own strategies, and I thought, wow, if I can do this, anyone can do it. So I kind of felt, well, why not, do something that gives back to others and helps the people going through the same type of situation as I did. And there are a lot of people out there, especially in today's economy, that are really overwhelmed with credit card debt. And they think they have no way out, when actually they do. There are options.
So we're talking with Mandy Akridge, the author of Negotiate and Settle Your Debts, a debt settlement strategy. So why would a credit card company or other credit institution accept only partial repayment or forgive a portion of your debt? It seems like it's against their best interest than to try to collect everything.
Well, actually, Matthew, it's not completely against their best interest, because they actually They accept a settlement on a debt that they think is a bad debt. So what happens is not only may they get a partial settlement, but they also get to write off the whole of the bad debt. So for them, for companies, it's really not a complete losing situation. They do get something. And if you really sit down and calculate how much interest you've paid without even touching the principal of the amount that you owe, really the company hasn't done that bad. Especially if you've been paying at the minimum payment for years and years and years. You've probably long since paid what you originally owed.
So what you're saying is don't feel bad for the credit company.
No, I wouldn't feel bad. I wouldn't feel bad at all.
How did you get the guts to ask for so much? Because the subtitle of your book is Settle for 20 cents, sometimes 20 cents on the dollar?
Yeah, as low as 20 cents on the dollar, yes.
That's amazing.
I think that the main thing is when you come up with a strategy, it's something that has to really be something that you believe in and that you can get the credit card companies to believe in. For instance, it's like getting water out of a stone. If they think they can get absolutely nothing out of you, they're going to take anything. And I mean, anything within reason. Certain banks are much more flexible than others. Like I found Bank of America to be particularly flexible in their settlements. And other banks aren't. So the ones that I got that are in my book, which is the Bank of America settlements and Chase, those ones were the ones I had real success with. Others may not have been as successful, and I may only have got 45 cents on the dollar instead of 20. But it really varies from situation to situation. And I think the main thing to remember is when you are doing debt settlement, they really have to believe that you have a hardship, because if they don't and they think you're making, a whole bunch of money and you can easily pay back, then they're really going to dig their heels in and want their money. So I think it all comes across in how you portray yourself.
When you started doing this along the way, did you make some mistakes?
Of course. I did make mistakes, but I just pretended that I wasn't a pro. I mean, after the first couple of ones, I felt like I was a pro, but the whole thing is to pretend that you're not a pro, because if they think that you know what you're doing, they tend to back off and then really, really try and get much more out of you than you may have to give. My understanding of the collection agencies is that these banks don't want to throw good money after bad. So if you are someone that has no job, has no income coming in, and there's really no assets, they're not going to waste a lot of time taking you to court to try and sue you to get nothing, because it takes money to take people to court. So I think they evaluate you and to see where on the credit scale of being able to retrieve monies from you, where on that scale you fit in. In February of 2010, I believe, the new laws came into effect. And basically what those laws are doing is that they can't just jump your interest rate without telling you about it. They have to get your permission. Things like universal default is much more strictly viewed. In other words, if you've been paying credit card A perfectly on time for 2 years and everything's great, but credit card B you defaulted, credit card A is not allowed to push the interest rate up based on how you treated the other company. So this universal default was a very important law that came into effect in 2010. Because what was happening is people were suddenly finding their interest rates going from 9% to 29%, and they were like, wow, I've been paying this on time. What happened,
I know when I first got my credit card, I was just out of high school. And by the time I was 22, I had 7 credit cards, and they were all maxed out.
Wow.
And I wasn't able to make the payments. But I kind of set myself up for that because, they were offering it, and I started using the checks that they would send me in the mail, the blank checks, and I'd pay off the other credit card with that, and it was just a huge mess.
Yeah, it's a big trap.
So I had to get serious about it. It is.
The checks are a big trap, and I'm sure what you did too is when you got one credit card that said, oh, we'll give you 0% for 6 months, you jumped on that. You transferred balances, and you start playing the balance game. Yeah,
and they really had me, and emotionally, I felt terrible. I felt like I would never get out of debt, and I had this big, cloud of debt over my head, and it was probably the worst time of my life. And so I imagine you can relate to that feeling of not knowing that you can't dig yourself out.
So let me ask you this, though. Did you change your spending strategies after you got yourself out of debt?
Yes, I did. We got rid of all of our expenses. We didn't have a telephone. We had a pager, and we used the payphone and a pay card across the street because, we couldn't afford to have a phone because they wanted a $200 deposit, and then we didn't have a TV. We didn't have internet. We got down to bare bones. We found out what was necessary for living, and then from there on, we cut down everything. And we started really. Well, we didn't have children back then, but it was Spartan conditions, and fortunately, one of the things we did was we became resident managers, and were able to save a lot of money on our housing. So that's kind of what we were doing, and that helped us get out of debt faster. But this settling debt, I mean, that is huge because people just see that, I have $40,000 or $80,000 I have to pay back. What would you tell people who are not familiar with your strategy and the first thing that comes in their mind is their friends tell them just claim bankruptcy?
I'm not crazy about bankruptcy, but it is there and it is available. And I feel that people should use bankruptcy when there's absolutely nothing else left to do. When you go, okay, I give up. I've got no way out of this debt. There's just no way I can even pay a settlement. When you get to that point, and there's really nothing else you can do, I say consider bankruptcy. But until then, if you can maybe negotiate settlements and get those settlements paid up over several months, if you can get an agreement from the banks to, give you 6 months to pay off the settlement and things like that, and they do that, then I would say try that first. Bankruptcy you can always do any minute of the day, and it's quick too.
Well, what would you say was your strategy as far as your demeanor dealing with the banks? I know sometimes we were dealing with collection agencies that were just hounding us, and they were making threats that I understand now they weren't actually by law allowed to make. They weren't allowed to garnish our wages and several things they said they could do.
They're not without a judgment, right?
Yeah. And, it was a scare tactic. We were young. We didn't know anymore. And so one of the guys that was calling us basically said they were going to send a sheriff to my wife's office and deliver papers, and she worked in the finance department of a very large company. So that wouldn't have been good, and that was a good threat because he knew where she worked, and it was just it would not be good. So
they put a lot of fear into her to get you to pay. And they know how to hit those hot trigger buttons. They know that if they tell your neighbors, you're going to be embarrassed, and so they try and do whatever it takes to get you to pay them. However, if you send them one of those cease and desist letters, you can really get them to stop doing that.
Really?
And yes, there's something called a cease and desist letter, which I have in my book, and that tells any collection agency that they may not come to your work, they may not call you, they may only communicate in writing, and any violation of that is a violation of the FDCPA, which is basically $1,000 fine every time they do a violation. So when you are dealing with these collection agencies, you should be documenting your conversations and everything they do. So
you say document everything?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you find that when you're talking with the banks, just being very businesslike or being personal, did you plea with them? What was it that you found that worked as far as the approach you took with them?
I think what I would say worked is just acting like I didn't know what I was doing. You know what I mean? Acting like I didn't know about settlements, and you ask things like, well, would you consider something called, I believe it's a settlement? Do you guys do that kind of stuff? And you start with that kind of approach. So that and they're usually quite guarded when they answer you. They go, yeah, we do settlements. How come? So I said, well, is that so? You do that. So what kind of settlements do you do? And you just start gently talking about it, but you don't do it right in the beginning. You wait for at least 60 to 90 to 120 days before you start bringing up the conversation.
So they know that you're already defaulting. Does that help your position to already be defaulting on it?
Yes, it helps your position to be defaulting because that's the only time that they seem to take note of people is when they're defaulting, so which is sad. They should really try to help people before it gets to that horrible stage,
So, living debt-free sounds great to most people, and I aspire to that, and I aspire to teach people that. But do we have to live with credit card payments? Is that a fact of life, or do you use cash more now since you've gone through this? What has your approach been afterwards, after going through all this?
Well, to be honest with you, I have no credit cards left. I have one little itsy-witsy line of credit, a business line of credit that I use, and it's not really linked to my name, it's linked to my business. And that's it. I just do not use credit cards anymore. I mean, they're not. If you open my purse, you'll see a ATM debit card, and that's it. So anything that I spend comes straight from my account. And I think very carefully before I make purchases. I may go into a clothing store and go, oh, wow, I really want to buy something new. And then I look at it, and I may try it on, and then I look at it again. I think, do I really need this? And I think to myself, well, I'm going to leave now, and if I come back tomorrow and I still want it, I'll buy it. So my whole way of purchasing changed, because the money's coming out of an account.
Can people get sued? Can people get sued by their credit companies to mandatorily make payments?
Well, yeah, you can. There's always a chance of getting sued. There's always a chance. Some people do, and they say statistically it's a very low amount, because once again, they don't want to throw good money after bad, and they're going to come after you if they think you have assets. So if you have a nice fat bank account somewhere that you've told someone about, or you have a couple of boats in the yard, or whatever it is, if they find out that you have assets, yes, they're more than likely to come after you. So I think the whole thing, and remember that sometimes these collection agencies ask you to send them proof of your bank accounts and all that stuff. I would never send anything that I was asked to send, because I didn't want them looking at my bank account. I didn't want them knowing my bank account number. Yeah, I wouldn't send anything. I would just keep saying I don't have any money. I'm sorry, and they'd ask for bank accounts, and you just hedge it. You just say no, I can't do that at this time, and I'm on unemployment. If you want me to send that stub, I'll send it to you, and all that kind of stuff. But do not give them your bank account number, because they could find a way to dip in there if they ever got a judgment against you.
So be guarded with your personal information and your bank statements and all of that. Okay.
Exactly.
So I think that a lot of people go into this, even though they may have heard about debt settlement, they need a book like yours so they don't get taken. These people that I've dealt with, they were kind of jerks, really, because they were making us feel bad, and they knew they were making us feel bad because they were trying to guilt us into making payments where I did the wrong thing and overspent. But people can get bullied into, you need to send me your bank account information because I need to check this or whatever. Is there some kind of counseling or something that you suggest people do, or do you believe you can just do this all on your own?
Well, I don't really believe in credit counseling, because the consumer credit counseling, I tried that, and it just actually got me into a worse mess. I would say read up on it and go to forums online, and you can always post questions there, and people post questions back. That's if this is the route you want to take. If you want to take the route of doing it yourself, you can do it. There are resources out there like mine that will help you. If you want to go for a professional debt settlement company, which I'm kind of against, because I feel like they charge a lot of money and don't get great results, then you can do it that way if you really feel that only a professional can do this job. But I can tell you this much. I helped a 74-year-old lady do this, and she was terrified of the banks, and by the end of it, she was so strong and said, I did it. Settled all her debts for
That's
about
awesome.
25 cents on the dollar. Yeah. Her son had run up her credit card.
Wow.
So it was, so I know if a 74-year-old lady can do it, anyone can do it.
That's great. How about these the settlement companies? You'd say don't use a settlement company. I understand there's some that are not very reputable.
There's a lot that are not very reputable. I think if you go to the Federal Trade Commission website, you'll probably find a list of companies not to deal with. I would say if you are going to deal with someone, Google them. Just Google them and put the word scam or rip-off behind their name and see what comes up. You'll be surprised how quickly you can find out information on other people's experiences.
So I know that when I got into debt, I was using my credit card for literally everything. I was using, like I said, I used the paper checks to pay for other credit cards that were higher interest, so I figured that was okay to do that. But it did catch up with me, but I ended up using my credit cards for gas and for food and for living expenses because my job was just, it was paying a little over minimum wage, and that was definitely not going to keep up with the thousands of dollars I racked up. Was it kind of the same for you? Was it just living expenses or business, or
actually,
what was
mine
it for
was
you?
a combination. I'm going to say of a couple of real estate ventures that gone wrong, where I ended up losing money on the properties and putting repairs, all that on the credit card. So I ran up a lot that way, and then it was just a matter of paying and keeping paying at the minimum payment. And that went on for about 5 years. I barely added anything onto these credit cards, and the minimum payments just kept me paying. Didn't matter how much money I made, and I made quite a bit of money in 2008. And it was just, didn't matter how much I made, I didn't come out at the end of the month. You have to come up with your own personal strategy that's going to work for you.
Did you ever determine how long you would have been paying the minimum payments on those?
In my book I've got a little calculation. I think it's 50 years.
50 years?
Yeah, if you paid their minimum payment, it takes you about 50 years to pay for your debt, and you end up paying it about 400% of it back.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Did you
so if you
publish
owed
in your book what year?
If you owe $100,000, let's just say round figure, you could end up paying about $350,000 back. So you have to figure that. Now, let's say you settle for 20 cents on the dollar. Compare the $20,000 you've settled with to $350,000 that you would pay if you just kept on paying. I think the results are there, and it's obvious which way, for me, was the better way to go.
Is there any closing words or advice you'd give, general advice for the listeners to kind of, who are thinking about this or are apprehensive about settling this huge amount of debt that they have?
Yes, I would say, to the average person who's got a huge load of debt, consider this. Your debts are unsecured. It's not like a house where they can take the house away from you. An unsecured debt is the easiest debt to settle. And always what comes first is the food on your table and the roof over your head. And after that, the credit cards and all that expenses come after that. So I would say, put your priorities in order and come up with a strategy and definitely make that move to change your life, because debt is a horrible situation to be in for most people. And why not eliminate the stress?
Thank you for listening to the Preeminence Podcast. Subscribe to hear powerful interviews and insights each week automatically downloaded the moment they go live. Share this episode with your team, your friends, and post it on social media. Let us know your comments and suggestions for the show at m@ascend.net. That's the letter M @ASYND.net.